When someone doesn't come back, when she leaves and stays gone, it has a tendency to stir something deep inside you. It challenges your sense of worth. It forces you to question, was I not enough? That voice can become unbearable if you allow it to go unchecked. You sit in the silence hoping that maybe she'll return, that maybe she'll see what she missed, but you have to understand something fundamental. Your value is never supposed to be measured by whether or not she comes back. Her return or lack thereof does not define who you are. It only reflects the limits of what she was capable of appreciating. We're conditioned to internalize rejection as a reflection of personal failure. That's what makes it so painful. If she doesn't come back, you assume it must be because you lacked something, some trait, some behavior, some quality that would have been enough to hold her. But what if that assumption is entirely wrong? What if it wasn't about what you lacked, but about what she couldn't handle? Some people are simply not built to handle death. They're not equipped for emotional honesty, for true intimacy, for the kind of vulnerability that love requires. When they face it, they run. And when you chase them, thinking that you're going to prove your worth, all you do is shrink yourself to meet them where they fell short. This is where self-respect becomes non-negotiable. The moment she chose not to return, the moment she decided that walking away was easier than working through it, that was the moment you were handed clarity, painful clarity, yes, but clarity nonetheless. And the mistake many men make is that they take that moment and turn it inward, letting it rot into shame. But there's no shame in being abandoned by someone who was never ready for you in the first place. There is only strength in recognizing it, and then choosing not to abandon yourself in the process. You don't need someone's validation to prove you're worthy. It's a dangerous lie. We often tell ourselves that love, in order to be real, must be returned. But love is not always reciprocal, and that doesn't mean it wasn't real on your end. It simply means you were ready for a kind of relationship she was unwilling or unable to offer. And when you stop tying your value to whether she comes back, that's when you take the power back. Because if she stays gone and you still rise, you've proven something far more important than anything. Her return could have validated that you are capable of standing tall on your own. The truth is, some people leave because they expect you to fall apart without them. It's not even malicious in all cases. It's just how they operate. They expect that their absence will, her silence is loud enough, leave you begging, chasing, questioning. And when you do those things, you reinforce the very dynamic they assumed you would. But when you don't, when you keep moving, when you heal instead of hope, that silence becomes deafening. Your refusal to crumble without her presence becomes a mirror she may not be ready to look into. And that's not about revenge. This isn't about playing games. It's about setting the record straight with yourself. If you constantly need someone to return in order to feel valuable, then your self-worth will forever be held hostage by people who never had the capacity to see you clearly in the first place. But if you detach your identity from their decisions, you begin to realize that value isn't proven by being chosen. It's lived out in how you carry yourself after not being chosen, because there's dignity in staying solid while others drift. There's strength in not reaching out just to soothe your ego, and there's wisdom in realizing that if she couldn't see your worth while you were present, her coming back wouldn't change that. It would only delay the inevitable repetition of the same cycle. You have to ask yourself, why would I want someone back who didn't want to stay the first time? What does that say about how I view myself? The answer to that question determines the trajectory of your healing. If the answer is because I still need her to validate me, then you're still bleeding from the wound. But if the answer becomes, Dawn, need her to return because I now see what she never could, then you're not just healing, you're transforming. Don't chase ghosts. Don't wait for someone to finally decide you're worthy of love that should have been given freely. And don't let silence make you forget your value. The truth is, you were always enough. You were just too much for someone who was never ready for depth. And her absence is not proof of your inadequacy, it's just proof of her limits. So when she doesn't come back, let her absence remind you not of your pain, but of your power. When someone chooses to walk away without looking back, especially in silence, it reveals something essential about who they are and what they value. You might be tempted to believe that their silence means indifference, or worse, that you didn't matter. But silence, especially in the aftermath of shared connection, is never neutral. it speaks volumes. And what it often says is that the person walking away isn't prepared to take responsibility for the weight of what they left behind. The one who leaves in silence has made a choice, a very deliberate one. They've decided that protecting their own comfort, their own narrative is more important than facing the discomfort of accountability. That's not strength, that's avoidance. And if you're the one left behind trying to interpret that silence, you're left with an ache that can distort your sense of reality. If you let it, you start filling in the blanks with self-lame inventing reasons why you must have deserved abandonment. That's the trap. That's where you lose yourself. But here's the deeper truth. Someone who disappears when things get hard, someone who chooses silence over communication, escape over effort, is revealing that their commitment was conditional, that it was tied not to the mutual journey, but to how easy or validating the relationship felt for them. And when things got real, when conflict required maturity, when emotional honesty demanded effort, they opted out, they left. Not because why you shouldn't go back weren't worth it, but because they weren't ready to confront their own emotional limitation. The danger here is that if you're not careful, you'll turn their exit into your blueprint for how you see yourself. You'll internalize their actions as a statement about your worth. You'll think, if she didn't come back, maybe I wasn't enough to fight for. But people don't leave because you're not worth fighting for. They leave because they weren't willing to fight in the first place. There's a difference between being left and being unworthy. Don't confuse the two. It's incredibly painful when someone you opened yourself up to, someone who saw your vulnerability, your flaws, your efforts, walks away without explanation. And that pain can create an illusion that maybe, just maybe, if you'd done something differently, she would have stayed. But that illusion is toxic because it puts all the responsibility for the relation's failure on your shoulders while letting the other person escape with no accountability. And relationships that, on their core, are a shared responsibility. You can't carry all the weight and call it love. When she walked away and didn't come back, it wasn't just about her leaving the relationship. It was about her walking away from the work that love requires. Real love requires patience, understanding, difficult conversations, and emotional resilience. If she wasn't willing to engage in that process, then her absence isn't a sign of your inadequacy. It's a reflection of what she was unwilling to give. You may find yourself tempted to chase closure, to beg for answers, to make sense of the silence. But closure isn't about getting a reason from someone else. It's about choosing to believe that someone's absence is an answer in itself. It tells you what they prioritized. It tells you how much discomfort they were willing to endure for the sake of something meaningful. And if the answer is none, then you've learned all you need to know. What's crucial here is not just accepting that she left, but understanding what that choice actually represents. It represents her threshold for intimacy. It reveals her tolerance for conflict and her courage in the face of emotional challenge. And if she failed in those areas, the last thing you should do is step in and try to rescue the situation by diminishing yourself. If she wouldn't do the work when it mattered, she was never truly committed to the path, and that path, the one that requires self-awareness, honest communication, and deep vulnerability, is the one you deserve to walk with. Someone who's willing to show up and stay, someone who meets difficulty with effort, not avoidance, someone who understands that silence isn't strength. It's just a convenient way to exit without facing the consequences. And if that's the kind of love she offered, you're better off not having it. There's dignity in being the one who stayed present. There's strength in being the one who is willing to talk through the pain, to face the truth, to hold space for growth. Don't let someone's silent departure make you question those qualities. They're rare. And if she couldn't match them, if she chose comfort over connection, then let her go fully. Let her leave without dragging pieces of your self-worth with her. The one who left in silence made a statement not about who you are, but about what she couldn't confront, and you don't need to chase an explanation. That was already made clear by her decision. Some things end not because they're broken beyond repair, but because only one person was willing to pick up the tools. So, if she left and didn't come back, don't wait in the ruins hoping for her return. Start building again without her. When someone you once gave your heart to watch as you heal in silence, it creates an emotional tension they didn't anticipate. People get comfortable with the version of you that they believe they have power over, the one who's hurting, who's still reaching out, who still reacts. When you begin to reclaim your peace, when you begin to respond with clarity instead of confusion, detachment instead of desperation, It unsettles them, especially if they never expected you to find strength outside of their validation. Most people who leave don't truly expect you to rise. They expect you to crumble, or at least stay tangled in the pain long enough to confirm their decision to walk away. It's not always malicious. It's psychological. It feeds the illusion that they held more value in your life than they actually did. They want to feel significant, and the chess sign of building emotional walls with purpose significance is watching someone fall apart in their absence. But what happens when you don't? What happens when you begin to get better, not bitter? That's when the panic sets in, not for you, but for them. Your healing becomes unsettling, not because you're doing something wrong, but because it forces the other person to face something. They weren't ready to see that your value was never dependent on them, that you were always whole, even if you forgot for a while. And now that you're remembering who you are, it threatens the narrative they've built to justify leaving. They told themselves you were too much or not enough, or emotionally unstable. But now they're confronted with a version of you that doesn't fit that story anymore, and it shatters the comfort of their delusion. You see, healing isn't just a personal victory, it's also a confrontation. It forces people who left to witness the truth that your worth was intrinsic, that your growth was inevitable, and that they misjudged you, not because they couldn't see your potential, but because they weren't ready to rise with you. And that realization cuts deeper than any goodbye ever could. It's a reckoning one that's often met with silence, confusion, or attempts to re-enter your life under the guise of just checking in. But don't be fooled by the panic disguised as curiosity. When someone reaches out just as you found your footing, it's not always about missing you, it's about missing the control, the access, the emotional reaction, the version of you that didn't yet realize you didn't need them. Because healing removes that leverage. It cuts the emotional cord they once pulled on to feel relevant, and nothing feels more threatening to someone who depended on your pain than your peace. There's a strange shift that happens when you start showing up for yourself. You begin to speak differently. You think clearer. You set boundaries not to punish others, but to protect your growth. And the person who used to provoke chaos in your life suddenly realizes they have no more influence. That realization isn't neutral. It breeds anxiety, not because they suddenly care more deeply, but because the power dynamic has collapsed. What once gave them a sense of importance no longer exists, and now they the one left wondering what changed. What changed is you. You stopped looking for closure in places that only offered confusion. You stopped interpreting their mixed signals as signs of hope. You started recognizing that healing isn't about proving your worth to someone else. It's about finally seeing it yourself, and when you do, you create emotional distance that no apology or half-hearted message can bridge. You're no longer available for their unfinished business. You're focused on your own transformation. This is why she panics, because she thought you'd be stuck. She thought you'd stay emotionally attached, replaying memories and holding on to what-ifs. But now you rebuilding new narratives, ones where you're the protagonist, not the victim. And in doing so, you highlight everything. She refused to become honest, accountable, emotionally mature. That contrast doesn't just sting, it terrifies her because it proves that you lose her. She lost you. And what she lost wasn't just a person, it was a future, a connection that could have grown into something remarkable if she had chosen to stay and evolve with you. But that's not your burden to carry. Her regret is not your responsibility, and her panic, that's not your signal to slow down or look back. It's just an echo of her own choices, finally catching up with her. The beauty, stop chasing, start elevating, of healing is that it makes peace with the past without needing permission. It allows you to walk forward with integrity, even if those who left never acknowledged the cost of their absence. And as you continue that walk, understand that the panic she feels now is the consequence of her own short-sightedness, not a reflection of your worth. So when she panics at the sight of your peace, let her. You've earned it. One of the most powerful and confusing things you'll ever experience after a painful separation is the moment you stop chasing answers and start living them. You stop obsessing over what went wrong. You stop replaying every conversation. You stop waiting for the apology that never came or the closure you once thought you needed. And in that stillness, you realize something unexpected. Your clarity becomes her discomfort. Your silence becomes her chaos. And not because you've done anything to provoke her, but because your healing reveals her avoidance. You see, when you were in pieces, there was predictability, in that she could predict your next move. She knew the text would come. The subtle attempts to reconnect, the emotional availability. Those were things she quietly counted on because they reaffirmed her value, even if she no longer wanted to be with you. Your longing kept her comfortable. It confirmed that she still mattered even from a distance. And now that you're not playing that role anymore, that you've reclaimed your emotional energy and stopped reaching out, there's nothing left to affirm her story. That story, the one where she was the one in control, the one who moved on first, the one who didn't feel the lost starwood to unravel, because when you don't chase, it forces her to wonder why. Not out of love necessarily, but out of ego, out of fear, out of the unsettling realization that maybe you were the one who could have led something better if only she'd been ready to grow, and that discomfort, the awareness that she might have underestimated you, begins to eat away at the certainty she once had feeling, threatens people who are never fully honest with themselves if she left thinking you'd be stuck. Your growth feels like betrayal, not because you've wronged her, but because you're no longer fulfilling the role she cast you in. You were supposed to be the one hurting, not the one thriving. You were supposed to be longing, not letting go. And when that expectation dies, she's left face to face with a version of you that proves her wrong. People don't panic when someone they don't care about moves on. They panic when someone they thought they had figured out becomes unrecognizable. In the best way, you become someone who doesn't chase breadcrumbs, who doesn't engage in emotional tugafor, who doesn't answer to the old triggers, and that transformation forces her to ask a question she may never voice out loud. Did I lose something? That was actually rare. That question haunts people, especially when the answer leans toward yes. And here's what most people don't understand about healing. It doesn't scream, it doesn't announce itself, it just quietly stops participating in dysfunction. It exits the game entirely, and that kind of change doesn't invite closure. It exposes the lack of it when you stop responding, when you no longer offer your energy so freely. She doesn't just lose access. She loses the illusion. The illusion that you'd always be around, that you were emotionally dependent, that your value hinged on her presence. And when that illusion breaks, panic sets in, not because of what's gone, but because of what might have been. There's something deeply unsettling about watching someone walk away from your chaos and never look back. It forces reflection, even if it's uncomfortable, because deep down she knows you gave more chances than she deserved. You showed more patience than she earned. And now that you're no longer offering that grace so freely, she's left wondering what changed. The answer is simple. You did. You chose peace over patterns, growth over guilt, healing over history. And that choice redefines everything. It's in that redefinition. The high-value man's mindset that she realizes. Something painful. Your silence is not a pause, it's a conclusion. It's not a manipulation tactic. It's not a strategy to win her back. It's the end of the story she thought she could control. And that terrifies her because it means she no longer gets to decide when or how the door closes. You already closed it quietly on your own terms. And there's no key left in her possession. That's the difference between someone who's healed and someone who's pretending to. The healed person doesn't return to the fire that burned them. They don't need to prove anything. Their peace speaks for them. And when she sees you not only surviving but becoming stronger, she doesn't just lose a past partner. She loses the version of herself who thought she had you figured out. And that's a loss that lingers. So when you feel that tension, when you sense that sudden interest from someone who once dismissed your presence, understand what it really is. It's not love resurfacing. It's not clarity arriving too late. It's the unease of watching someone become untouchable after you thought they'd never move on. And that's not your burden to soothe. Let her sit with it. What happens when you start investing in yourself, when you shift all that emotional energy away from the person who drained it and pour it into becoming someone you're proud of? It disrupts everything, especially for the person who thought they'd always have access to your attention. When you start building, improving, climbing, even in quiet ways, it sends a message, not through words, not through confrontation, but through transformation. And the truth is, transformation can be a confrontation all by itself. One that forces the other person to come face to face with what they lost. Most people think healing is about forgetting, but it's not. Healing is about remembering everything clearly and choosing differently. You remember how you were treated, how often you ignored your own needs to accommodate theirs. You remember how they dismissed your feelings, made light of your boundaries, treated your loyalty like a given instead of a gift. But instead of holding on to that memory like a wound, you use it as a lesson you learn, and in learning you grow, and in growing you evolve into someone they no longer recognize, and that scares them. Because here's what you have to understand. People who benefited from the broken version of you will be uncomfortable with the healed version, the version of you that doesn't entertain disrespect, the version of you that doesn't beg, doesn't chase, doesn't explain your worth to people who were never listening. When you start honoring your own time, energy, and peace, you remove the fuel they once fed on you, no longer exist as a mirror for their ego, and that void you leave behind it echoes loudly. Suddenly they find themselves watching you from a distance, sometimes directly, sometimes through mutual connections, sometimes just through the haunting realization that you're not where they left you. You're not in the same emotional space, not waiting in the same place of pain. You've outgrown the dynamic, and they don't know how to respond to that, because nothing threatens the fragile sense of control more than someone who no longer needs anything from you. Not closure, not attention, not validation. And what truly stings is this: when they see you pour your focus into your craft, your body, your goals, your relationships with people who treat you with mutual respect, it becomes clear that you weren't broken, you were burdened, you were never weak, you were loyal. And the moment you remove that loyalty, the illusion of superiority collapsed, because it was never about you being less than it was about you being too much for someone who didn't want to grow. When you start healing, it's not just about what you gain, it's also about what they start to lose. They lose the comfort of being the one who got away. They lose the narrative. They told themselves that you were somehow dependent on them, that they were irreplaceable. And they lose the safety of knowing you'd always be available. That availability is what they really mourn, not the love, not the connection, but the access. And once that access is level up, without closure gone, they're left wondering how they ever let it slip through their fingers. There's an intensity in watching someone you took for granted become untouchable. It's not always about wanting them back often. It's about wanting back the version of yourself that had power over someone else. And when that power is gone, when that person no longer reacts, no longer responds, no longer plays the role you assigned them, that's when the panic sets in, because suddenly you're not just someone who left, you're someone who healed beyond their reach. But that kind of healing doesn't need to shout. It just quietly distances itself. It builds silently, and in doing so it becomes undeniable. There's a weight in that silence that words could never carry. It's the kind of silence that forces reflection, not just on what was, but on what will never be again. And sometimes that's the most unsettling part, not losing the person, but realizing they've become someone better without you. So when you're working on yourself, when you're choosing growth over games and purpose over people-pleasing, know this: they feel it. Even if they never say a word, even if they never reach out, even if they act like it doesn't matter. Deep down, they notice, because they expected you to fold. They expected you to stay stuck, and instead you evolved. And now they're left to sit with the realization that the very thing they discarded has become something they can no longer afford to ignore. Your peace is not a performance. Your growth isn't a message for anyone else, but make no mistake, its impact is felt. Let them feel it. One of the most misunderstood moments in the aftermath of a relationship isn't when the other person leaves or when the silence grows. It's when you finally begin to step fully into yourself, when your healing becomes undeniable, and suddenly the very person who once held your heart starts to panic. It's not because they missed you in the romantic sense. It's because they never expected to see you whole again. They never believe you be able to reclaim your power and your peace without them. And this panic, they may not admit it, they may hide it behind indifference or anger, but it's very real. It's the quiet recognition that the dynamic has shifted, and they're no longer the center of your emotional universe. You see, for a long time, your pain might have been a kind of anchor for both of you. It was a way to keep the story going, to keep the connection alive, even if it was painful and toxic. They relied on your hurt to validate their own choices, to avoid the responsibility of change, to maintain their control. But healing is a rupture of that system. When you start to heal, when you begin to untangle yourself from the emotional chaos, you take away the foundation that held them in place. Without that foundation, They have no choice but to confront what's left, a version of you that no longer needs them. This shift causes a panic, not because they regret losing you as a person, but because they lose the role. They played the message she gets when you don't return in your story for them. It's not just about the relationship ending, it's about the loss of control, the loss of certainty. When you were hurting, they could predict your behavior, they could navigate the emotional terrain with ease because it was familiar. But now with your healing, the terrain is unknown, unpredictable, and it unsettles them. They don't know how to interact with you anymore because the old scripts no longer apply. What's more, this panic often manifests in ways that seem confusing or even hurtful to you. You might notice sudden attempts to reach out, vague messages, or even coldness masked as indifference. These are not signs of genuine care or affection. Rather, they are attempts to regain some semblance of the influence they once held. It's a defensive response to the realization that you've moved beyond their grasp, and this reaction, as uncomfortable as it feels, is a sign of the power you've reclaimed. The deeper truth is that healing threatens those who benefited from your pain. Your growth exposes their complacency and forces them to face their own shortcomings. It reveals that they were never indispensable to your happiness, only to your suffering. And when you step into your own light, it throws their shadows into stark relief. This causes them to panic, because the illusion of permanence shatters. They thought they had more time, more influence, and suddenly that certainty evaporates. But here's the most important thing to remember. Their panic is not your problem. It's a reflection of their own inability to grow, to confront their mistakes, or to accept that you're no longer the person who will stay stuck in pain for their sake. Your healing is your responsibility to yourself first and foremost, not a weapon or a test for them. When you heal, you are not obligated to soothe their discomfort or explain your boundaries. Your peace is not negotiable. At the same time, this panic can be a powerful mirror for you. It shows you how far you've come. It confirms that the work you've done to reclaim your worth, your voice, and your happiness is real and visible, even to those who once ignored or diminished it. Their panic is proof that you are no longer available to old patterns, old wounds, or old expectations. It's evidence that your transformation is not just internal, it's evident in the way the world responds to you. In this process, it's crucial to hold firm to your own growth. Resist the temptation to return to old dynamics out of guilt, fear, or a final words. Never break your own standards. Desire to ease their panic. Your healing journey is sacred, and bending to someone else's discomfort undermines that sacredness. Instead, let their panic be a signpost, a reminder of your progress, not a call to regress as you move forward. Cultivate boundaries that honor your peace and your autonomy. Learn to recognize the difference between genuine connection and panic-driven attempts at control. Allow yourself the grace to prioritize your well-being above all else, because the day you stop adjusting for their panic is the day you fully step into your power. The day you refuse to be anyone's emotional crutch is the day you show what true healing looks like. So, when the panic comes, whether in silence or in sudden bursts of confusion, know that it's not about you losing something, but about them realizing what they never truly had. Your healing is your victory.